Good morning. I know everybody's still coming in slowly and it's early. We have the benefit of having the first panel, so I'll try again. Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, that warms my heart. Thank you all. Thank you all. So first of all, my name is Colonel Alton Johnson. I'm the G6 for the United States Army Pacific, and I will be hosting or moderating your panel today on the Tyranny of Distance, talking about non-kinetic effects in the Indo-Pacific Theater. To my right, we have Colonel Rhett Burroughs. Let me open my iPad so I can make sure I get his new title right, because he's extremely important and I don't want to mess this up. He is the Force Development Chief for the Mission Command System, so he's up in G8 in the Pentagon. So if there's any questions about money today, please direct those to Rhett.
Can I get a loan?
Yeah. Next, we have Colonel John Agnello. He's the commander of the 2nd Theater Information Advantage Detachment. I like the excitement about TIAD. Yes, sir. And then we have Colonel Alex Peak. He is the G6 for 1st Corps, JBLM. And then we have our subject matter expert, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Little, who's the director of the Army Program Office. All right, so as we get started, I'll give a little background about what we're gonna be discussing today, and then I'll turn it over to the panel members to address or to give some insight about themselves and what they do. And then we'll take a few questions, and then we'll move into audience participation. So if your question is not answered, feel free to contact these gentlemen. They're always available to help out. So if you are in this room and you don't understand or know what the Indo-Pacific Theater is, then obviously there is a challenge. But a lot of people have a misconception about the Indo-Pacific Theater. So what we don't have any slides. We have this one slide, and I think it says enough about the Tyranny of Distance. But the Indo-Pacific is the largest theater of operations in the world, with a massive footprint that spans from the Arctic Circle in the north to the continent of Australia in the south, to India in the west, and all the way over to the Americas in the east. And when we formulate as a JTF, it goes all the way actually to the west coast of the United States. It's an incredibly diverse and expansive area encompassing a myriad of cultures, geopolitics, countries, religions, and languages. It spans more than 100 million square miles and 52% of the Earth's surface. It encompasses 36 nations, representing half the world's population, and has over 3,200 spoken languages in those countries. The Tyranny of Distance, when it comes to this theater, is a daunting challenge that we in USERPAC G6 Shop obviously take very seriously and work every day to accomplish our mission. So that's the premise that we'll be using to discuss today's topic, the Tyranny of Distance and non-kinetic effects. So I'll now pass it over to the panel members who will introduce themselves and give you a little background about them.
Yeah, so Rhett Burroughs, I am the Chief of Mission Command Systems in the Force Development section of the Army G8. What does that mean? I own all the money for everything that you guys want, everything that these guys want. It's a pretty big portfolio and it's pretty awesome. And my goal is to kill Win-T. I should get a round of applause for that, okay? There we go. Yes, thank you.
Except from the Win-T program director.
Yeah, oh yeah, if you're here, I apologize, but not apologizing, okay? So we need to modernize. We need to modernize at a fast pace. We have a very narrow time window, and you'll hear a lot about Next Gen C2 and what that entails. But basically what we're going to do is going to modernize all 3 compos in the next 3 years. That's what we're gonna do, okay? If you were a hand-me-down from a different compo and you're gonna get a Win-T system, it ain't gonna happen. We're gonna field you the newest, latest, and greatest kit, and it's gonna happen at speed and scale, okay? What does that mean? It costs money to get rid of Win-T. I just wanna throw it in the Savannah River. There's lots of room out there, and I wanna get new kit into the soldiers' hands. So how do we accelerate that? That's what I'm looking at up there in the DAG8 now, is acceleration costs money, but we need to move fast, and we need to move fast properly. I need to get from, without your pops and sneeze, from 6 C-17s, just for your headquarters elements for a combat arms brigade to deploy, 6 C-17s to a pallet worth of equipment. That's the difference between what Next Gen C2 really is, okay? There's cost trade-offs at all that, and we can go into detail where you want to whenever we get to the panel. With that, I'll hand it over to the TIAD.
So I'm Colonel John Agnello. I'm the commander of the 2nd TIAD Theater Information Advantage Detachment here at Fort Gordon. So what's a TIAD? Army's newest organization. The idea is executing information activities, supporting the theater commander. So 3 TIADs being stood up, one in the Pacific, one here in Fort Gordon and one in Europe. Second TIAD here, first TIAD out in Hawaii. They're standing up just at the same time we are right now. What do they do? So we got a combination of cyber and EW, civil affairs, public affairs, and PSYOP soldiers, senior level officers and senior NCOs. And the idea is executing information activities, which means, how do we enable decision making? How do we protect friendly information? How do we inform domestic and foreign audiences? How do we influence target audiences? And how do we execute attack or information warfare? So that's kind of what we look at. And the idea when we talk about what's going on in the Tyranny of Distance and out in the Pacific, one of the biggest things we want to look at is how do we layer all these non-kinetic effects? So some people will talk about what the network does, and then others, some of us will be able to talk about like where we can put non-lethal effects and actually execute a mission that helps better what's going on in the theater itself. So, it's easy to drop bombs out there. No, I shouldn't say that. It's easy to drop bombs normally, but it is much harder to drop a Tron, if you will. It's the idea of doing cyber EW type of attack, and also trying to do the influence mission is much harder. So that's the kind of things that we do on that non-lethal side, and how we layer that with the effects that are going out there already.
Good morning, everybody. Alex Peak. I am the First Corps G6. First Corps is the Army force provider for Pacific forces. That incorporates 25th Infantry Division, the 11th Airborne Division, 7th Infantry Division, soon to be rebranded as the MACP, and we will soon inherit around about 1 October, 4th ID, and working with 2nd ID. So very large Corps with the ability to become a joint task force supporting USAPAC and Indo-PACOM organizations. Our key focus in the 6 is to integrate comms across the Pacific, the vast area, and work through the various challenges of having multiple nations with different dispersed systems, and work through the policy challenges to ensure that we are able to have interoperability and to communicate seamlessly and effectively.
Good morning, I'm Jeffrey Little. I'm the director for the Army Program Office for Information Advantage. And so the primary role is to support the TIAD. And when we support the TIAD, it's to identify the technology and the doctrine across and the .mil-PF requirements to provide the force for the newest structure, so that the TIADs can not just deliver the information, but also have the data so they can see, sense, understand, and inform the commander's decision cycle, as well as have the right technical enabler, space, cyber, and EW, at the right time to deliver that message to support the commander's strategic message. So without the advocacy of the proponent office, the TIAD to be out there alone trying to work across the Army and across organizations to help that support. So that's where I work in this current role.
Great. All right, so we'll go ahead and start with the questions. Since we started with Colonel Little, or finished with Colonel Little, we'll jump back in. So the first question is, as the Indo-Pacific Theater continues to evolve as a complex and dynamic environment with multiple actors and competing interests, how does the interplay between secure and resilient communication networks and electromagnetic spectrum superiority influence in our ability to operate effectively in a DDIL environment?
So as mentioned, as you see on the map, Indo-PACOM is a vast area, a lot of water, not a lot of land, and I know I'm getting feedback, so I'm gonna try to adjust this, Mike, I apologize. And kind of give a perspective, right? We give the distances, but if you look at the main area that you're looking at on the map, it's roughly the size of the continental US. So just give you a scale that we can understand what you're fighting for crossing water. And so what does that mean? We have to have speed and agility. So we have to have those assured comms to maneuver, to move and to maneuver, and not just by fiber, because fiber is not going to be there, it's across the spectrum. And so for information advantage, to move the large data rate, and how much data do you need, how much compute do you actually need at the edge and can support? Can you provide the whole, the processor and the smelter of power to run a data center forward at tactical edge, or do you need just enough compute to provide that critical targeting information to enable any sensor, any shooter in the kill web to support? Because this is a joint fight. It requires our purple partners, our green partners, and blue forces, a holistic approach to enable this. So no longer that whole kill chain of one sensor to one shooter. It has to be any sensor, any shooter, and it's got to be regional. So that's why, as you mentioned with Colonel Burroughs moving to the next gen C2, is going to enable that. So you have the layered approach to the communications. He'll go in more depth into that depth of questions. That's his expertise. In order to provide that data, so the soldier on the ground can see hey, this is a bad target coming, yes or no, I'm safe. But the commander at the corps level can see the battlefield. He can see, sense, understand it, as well as decide in his ability to blind, deceive, and destroy the adversary's ability to see their side of the battlefield at the critical moments to enable maneuver forces on the ground, as well as enabling the maneuver through the spectrum. Because without the spectrum being able to talk, no matter how much fiber you have, it's not going to be there. And so, pause on my thought. Okay, and so in order to make that work, that allows you to then converge effects. As mentioned, yes, doing kinetic, that's easy, but kinetic is not the necessary the answer to be. It's no longer holistic, it's a holistic approach to targeting itself. It's not just I drop a bomb, I shoot a bad guy, I deliver a kinetic effect and I win. No, it's the layering approach. It has to be that kinetic with the non-kinetic, the holistic approach to targeting. I'll pause there.
No, very, very good answer. And I do want to pull on that thread. I mean, I think it's extremely important. This is not a multi-partner environment panel, but I think what you said is extremely important. When we talk about the tyranny of distance and communications and non-kinetic effects, a lot of times we speak about U.S. forces, not realizing that when we talk about American superiority in that theater, we are heavily reliant on access, spacing, overflight, and working with partners. And so helping solve the issue of tyranny of distance can't be done without taking into account partner communication systems, how we talk to them, what they use, what we use, and what's the barrier to entry to make sure we can communicate. Like I said, there's over 3,000 languages there. So when we build things for Americans in English, obviously, how does that translate to our partners? How do they use it, and how do we make sure that that the intent is understood, not just heard, but understood, which is extremely important. So very good answer. Thank you, Colonel Little. All right, so we'll move on to Colonel Peak. So Alex, given our reliance on commercial PLEO constellations, how do we balance the bandwidth-intensive demands of products like Maven Smart System with the operational reality of denied, degraded, intermittent, and limited connectivity? Specifically, what strategies, technical or doctrinal, can help us reduce reliance on high-throughput links while still ensuring timely joint and multinational interoperability across the theater?
Thank you for that question. So one of the biggest components about being the Pacific is our reliance on beyond the line of sight communications, heavily on Starshield as we're going through next gen C2, C2 fix. That is a bit problematic because from lessons learned or observed from Ukraine, we know that there's a significant capability to jam those comms, coupled with Maven Smart Systems being cloud-based, and a lot of our C2 fix, next gen C2 is relying on those things and apps in the cloud. We need to have the ability to do on-prem compute and understand that Palantir has the intellectual property rights for Maven Smart Systems, but as a DoD whole, because it's not just an Army problem, it's all the services problem as we use Maven Smart Systems. We absolutely need the ability to have flyaway kits that is mobile with the compute power to do Maven Smart Systems and some type of AI as we're doing AI to facilitate the military decision-making process. So that's one thing that we need to start to look at is how do we bring those capabilities, those computes, and he hit on it a little bit, on-prem, so that way when we are in a DDIL environment, we can still function. Additionally, we do have one legacy piece of equipment that we need to revitalize, which is Smart T. That, as of now, is our only proliferated assured comms that we have in the DoD infantry, in the DoD arsenal. If the request out to industry would be, hey, how do you re-engineer, revitalize, relook equipment like Chimera or Starshield to make sure that it is assured, whether we're using, we do have FAB-Ts, but that's not available to the Army per se to do the high bandwidth intensive things that we need to do as far as connecting to the cloud, getting access to Maven Smart Systems, utilizing the apps that we're trying to go to simplify communications. Additionally, a layered approach with comms when we go through the devolution process of when we are in a contested environment, what does that look like? Are we bringing back the utilization of JBCP? Again, these are somewhat legacy pieces of equipment, but it is the only equipment that we have in the inventory that allows us to have somewhat assured comms to ensure that we can do mission command. Then on top of that, how do we communicate effectively? Meaning, if we're using less bandwidth, if we're using high bandwidth intensive things, how do we have brevet reporting, brevet communications, windows of opportunity that we communicate in those types of environments? So those are the things that we need to do, and then the challenge, those are the things we need to do as a DoD, but the challenge to industry is, how can you innovate? How can you bring together academia to figure out a way to provide some type of assured comms that gives us high bandwidth capability, so that way we can connect to the cloud. But until such time as that, we need to have on-prem compute.
No, I think it's a very good answer. I think that that's counterintuitive, because for the last few years in industry and in the military, all we've done is try to see how fast we can move everything into the cloud. But in a theater as dispersed as the Indo-Pacific, where you don't have the reach back to all the locations necessary to pull the data forward, I understand your point where you may need edge node processing at your fingertips. You may need something that actually provides NIPR, SIPR, MPE, allows you to get to Maven, and can operate in a DDIL environment and still provide you all the data you need when it's disconnected. And then when it reconnects, it syncs back up with the network. That's a very good point. All right, so let's move on, because I'm sure there are some people here working on edge node processing kits that probably meet that need, that probably just need to be experimented in our theater to see if it actually operates. Very good point. All right, so John, back to you. You've given us a lot of information about the Triad, but how does the Triad actually support operations in the Indo-Pacific Theater, and what type of capabilities does it have to integrate with other assets in theater?
So interesting. So as you know, as I'm thinking through that and thinking and listening to what my colleague said here, it's interesting. You had brought up access spacing and overflight. I know that that's the big thing in the Pacific. What is needed in order to execute the commander's objectives out there. So how do you get ABO? How do you get access spacing and overflight? We talk about tyranny of distance, and we talk about the networks that we need. We talk about edge node, edge compute. Well, getting that, in a lot of cases, has to do with you've got to interact with the local government, the local people. You've got to get the buy-in from those countries to allow you to put an edge node out there. You got to get the buy-in in order to allow you to use use an airfield as a hot point. How do we do that? What the Triad brings to the fight is the idea of having an organization that has an engagement team that can go out and actually meet with local leaders and kind of have the idea of, what do you need? How can I help you kind of idea? What can I do to help the environment, help the community, help the leadership there? And by us helping them, we can have the ability to use accessing to their sites for a hot point, or put some type of edge compute there, or whatever it may be. And then at the same time, that we have an engagement team that can do that, and then we have an information warfare team that can go out there with cyber and EW and execute things within the spectrum. Now, how do we do this? Technology is needed. So, Alex was talking about Maven Smart Systems, and that's part of understanding the environment and what we want to see, what's out there. One of the things that the Triad and information forces want to look at is, what do I need to visualize the battle space? And when I say visualize the battle space, it's not the maneuver forces on the ground per se. We're talking about, how do you visualize the information environment? How do you actually do it? We talk about, there's network nodes out there, there's compute, there's everything from cyber forces that are doing things, signal forces that are doing things out there. But then the information environment also includes, obviously social media and typical media. I'm not talking about just scraping scraping Facebook or scraping Twitter, what's out there. There's much more of that in the information environment. What is a target audience out there? What are the guys on the ground in the Philippines? What do they need? What do they want? We need people that understand that, and we want to be able to present that information to a commander on the ground to better understand his environment. Once he can understand that, then he can make a better, well-informed decision on how to execute the mission. That's part of how we look at tying in the information space when we talk about the operations out there. When we talk about across the competition continuum, every day we're in competition. Every day we're out there fighting the information fight. And that happens, through competition, crisis, and conflict, we are always going to be fighting in the information space. And so I think part of that is we've got to have capabilities out there that can visualize that can see what that is. And it's outside of the box thinking. It's not what I said before, not just scraping the internet to see what's out there in social media. It's about understanding the entire spectrum, understanding what is your footprint out there, what is the adversary's footprint, and also when you look at that, when we look at the environment, how can I hide the noise? We've got all this, everything across the electromagnetic spectrum. How can we hide in the noise when we're out there executing missions? All of that is when we talk about understanding the information environment. That's the type of things that the TIAD brings to the fight. That's the type of things when we look at technologies that the TIAD would need and other information forces need. Those are the type of things that we're looking for. That's how I'd go with that.
No, very good answer. And I completely understand your purpose or your point, because what we see a lot in the Army as well as the Indo-Pacific is their constant state of change. So I'm sure everyone's tracking. We've gone from MDTEFs to MDCs now. We've added TIADs, TFEs, and TSIGs. So the only thing constant is change. And so the next question, as the Army transforms in contact with the focus on the Pacific, what can units expect with regards to next generation C2 and acceleration? And how do we address the differences in mission between the Arctic and the jungles while we're modernizing this still? Colonel Barrows.
Yeah, so units, what can units expect? Don't worry about it. You're going to get what you get. Industry. All right, industry. This is where I want to have a candid one-on-one conversation. Okay. So transformation and contact is really, with this next gen C2 stuff like I said, we're going to push this through pretty fast. If you haven't got on the bandwagon, don't worry about it. There's lots of bandwagons to get on. Okay. There's 19 divisions, 18, 19 divisions. 38 brigades there's just combat arms brigades across the Army. We have tons of opportunity, and we're going to do it every year. You've seen one division. Okay, so I'm not gonna buy a bunch of iPhone 16s and give it to and then stretch that out like Win-T for the next 25 years, giving you the same version, the same crap. Okay, that's not going to happen. Now, a lot of our niche kit, like AFATADs, AMDUs, DSIGs, TAIAs, JDOCs, that's all now becoming apps. So then I become hardware agnostic. Okay, so what we're going into, we saw the panel yesterday where 4th Infantry Division and 3rd Corps and 25th are going to go through the first iteration of this. Okay, that's going to look completely different than the next iteration. And the patch chart will come out here pretty soon on what that exactly looks like. Okay, so industry partners, you're going to have plenty of opportunities to make sure that you can be a part of this, and that's what we need. Because what's going to happen is we're not necessarily going to buy, try, decide, but it's going to kind of look like that. What is the best of breed at the time? So where we can find those efficiencies. I honestly see, from my perspective, since Alex replaced me at First Corps and to the time I've been up in the Pentagon, is we're going to rent or lease equipment. I don't want to buy a radio and have to maintain it and have to do stuff and things with it. I just want to give it back to you when I'm done, right? And you modernize it and you update it. Just like me going in to get my family plan for my cell phone and get, the free phones for the next 3 years that, cost me twice as much, that kind of thing. So I'm okay with that, but it takes away the distractions from the soldiers. okay? So every division's gonna look different, and as you figure out how to iterate and get into this process, that's why you're here today, okay? The other thing is to understand the mundane yet most important stuff like interim authorities to operate, to test, to connect. Because if you don't pay some old retired crusty CW5 or colonel or lieutenant colonel to navigate that process for you, you're gonna struggle. And you wanna get that done up front so that when you do come to the table with something, when you're doing the program executive offices and saying, hey, we got this stuff. Okay, cool, can I put it on the network? Because Alex is way too busy to help you go through that process because he is just moving constantly in the Pacific. Always move in the Pacific, okay? AI at the edge, all right? I want you to think of a fire hose and a soda straw, all right? So, and then less than a soda straw in that DDIL environment in which we're gonna fight across the archipelagic fight, okay? I do need to get back to core data centers from the edge, right? So right now, it's the fire hose, okay? We're not being degraded. We're actually competing against each other for that bandwidth and that throughput, right? That's cool right now. How do we get those large amounts of data going through? That's the fire hose, okay? Now let's talk about the soda straw, okay? I don't need everything going all the way back to sanctuary if there is a thing anymore. I need, what can I do on-prem? Well, I can use AI and ML to process and do analysis at prem. And then what really does need to go through that soda straw so we can prioritize that, okay? How does that help us at the edge? And that means we have to have edge compute. Edge compute's not gonna go away. We don't have the luxury of industry where industry goes into a country, you have a set infrastructure and you already know how they're established until something gets blown up. Then your world is in chaos, but that's where we come in. We don't know where we're gonna go, whether it is the jungle, whether it is the Arctic. One thing I do know is I don't have time to get a one-size-fits-all solution. So if you wanna focus on the Arctic industry, focus on the Arctic. You wanna focus on the jungle, focus on the jungle capability, because I gotta figure out how to get these 25th Infantry Division guys to get through that canopy. I gotta figure out how that we can get the batteries to survive long enough against your body heat in the Arctic so that they can send a radio message before the battery dies in 5 minutes. Right? Those are the solutions that we're gonna keep bringing up here and where you can really focus on Alex's team for the requirements that they have and your specificity of whatever you are bringing to the table is where we are gonna be extremely interested. Because they are bringing us up from the field up there to make sure that we are still buying things that are needed down at echelon. I'll shut up there because I think I'm the last one we can start asking some questions.
No, Rhett and I have worked together for the last couple of years, and we don't always agree, but I've never agreed with him more than what he just said right now. If you have a product that you would like to experiment with that has not been approved for use on the network, it is a burden to the unit you have given it to. We have brand new things that are proposed to do miraculous things to help us on the network that aren't approved to operate on the network. And we just don't have the time to go through the ATC, ATO process to get it on the network because our operation pathways, which is a series of exercises we use, ranges between 50 to 57 exercises per year from platoon all the way up to the COCOM level, right? Some of them are JTF exercises where we're being validated by external units. So the last thing we need is to try something new in the middle of a major exercise to find out it doesn't work, right? So it can help us, or you can help us by making sure anything that you deliver is built to operate on the networks that we reside on.
And if I could, AJ, I would also add on to what we owe you is we're gonna make the requirements documents at the highest level very broad, okay? Because I need an antenna's an antenna's an antenna, whether it's HF, whether it's a OE254 or COM201 or whatever it is. However, if we modernize, you may go, the soldier may go to the supply sergeant and when he asks for, FM antenna so he can do digital fires, and you give him an OE2 or a COM201, and you're gonna take it, and then you're gonna wonder why 50% of your fire missions are lost because only an OE254 works, right? So yes, we're gonna have some problems. You know, that antenna that you guys feel non-proprietary, make sure everything is universal, standard. I wanna be able to take a laptop or a tablet or a radio and plug it into the same mounting kit in my vehicle. Okay, we're getting there. That's gonna be the new standard. I should have to do nothing more than to take a mounting kit, screw 2 holes into any vehicle, and it will work with anything. Okay, but we're gonna write those requirements documents so broad that we can change and we don't have to go through the process again to change the very specifics. It's driving the PEO community nuts. The program management community is going crazy. That's their cross to bear. At 10:15, I'm gonna talk about this again, about transforming at speed and echelon, just mindless plug for that. So where's some questions?
All right, so we are halfway in, so it is time for Q&A. We do have one microphone. If you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll pass the mic to you and you can ask your question so everyone can hear it. Come right up. Yeah, I don't feel like that. No, come on, right.
Because I think there's people on, is there people online here?
They're everywhere. You are important.
Yeah, you're the first one, man.
So, am I facing you? I'm facing the crowd.
Yeah, face the crowd.
All right. No, sir. I wanted to pull the thread because the first comment you had about rapid fielding. Because to me, I'm thinking nightmare of 3-4 divisions sharing the same battle space, different brigade combat teams, different equipment sets. Is what does that interoperability look like? You started pulling the thread on that, but for me, I'm looking at is what happens when we have to replenish those losses. Rapidly sustained. We're talking multiple different radio sets on the same mesh networks. I'm thinking standardized message formats, standardized COP overlays, because thinking if we have to rapidly field, we have to rapidly replace. So I just want to think about, can you go into specifics over what does that interoperability standard look like at scale?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I guess what I'll comment. You want it all. You change the problem set on it, right? Backwards compatibility is dead, okay? Nothing needs to be backwards compatible. Industry, that should make you extremely happy because now you do not have to go figure out how you need to hook up with a radio that no longer works or is no longer in production, okay? It's compatible with the joint forces and from here on forward. And that's kind of where I'm getting at with the industry standard, okay? So if you're the dongles, we need dongles, right? It's a standard dongle. The Apples, they come with them because they only have USB-C, okay? And you can convert and plug in anything you need. So those standards are important. Also being able to broaden where on the spectrum that kit can reside, and this is just the transport piece of it, right? I need it to transcend the spectrum. Because if you just give me one radio for FM, one radio for HF, something else, I'm gonna have 7 different daggers trying to time 7 different pieces of kit in a Bradley, right? So we're gonna consolidate all that down into one. Now we're gonna assume some risk here in this transformation, right? But that's okay, right? Commanders will assume the risk at speed because, if we let commanders just turn in all their WinT stuff, if they turned it in today and not have a capability and be like, hey, Army, I don't have a capability, right? Well, you turned in your capability, so now you're gonna have to figure that out, right? So now it is gonna be more deliberate in how we're gonna do that. However, everything should have a universal standard. So you and I, the only thing that we may have a problem with is ComSec, right? So, but all of our HF should talk to HF, no problem. Whether we go from PLEO to GEO, however we're gonna do that, it's still gonna be backwards compatible. Did I get close to answering your question? No, it is, okay. Okay.
All right, great question. Sir? It should have been on up. No.
Thanks for this panel today. Quick question that kind of gets after what Colonel Agnello mentioned about needing to develop ways to visualize the battlefield, but also to you and Colonel Peak about don't come to my exercises to test things. So in a way, roughly, don't come there without the test to connect.
That's a horrible paraphrase. We got everyone come to our exercises to test everything you have. When you come,
yes,
make sure. All right, there we go. That's what I clarify.
I apologize.
All right.
Part of what worked for Next Gen C2 was they laid out the series of exercises, how you kind of got in the front door, started, then it maybe came to a unit, then it went to Project Convergence. They kind of had a pathway of those. What is the similar pathway as you talk about these mission command systems or visualizing? Are you going to use that same? Do you have something else in mind? How do we align to that so we can get to that point for your exercises?
So I'll kind of start that one off. So a couple of things I see, how I see this. At the back of the room there's a fine gentleman that I know very well, Adam Dykstra. He's the director of the Cyber Battle Lab here at Fort Gordon, excuse me. One of the big things that we do here, and through through freaking Jeff's office over there with APOIA, the idea is really looking at the exercises that where we're talking about technologies for the TIAD. They go through their office, and actually a lot of the different types of TTXs and limited objective experiments through the Cyber Battle Lab here, through the SIFWEs, they call them, with Army Futures Command, and as they transform into the Transformation and Training Command, the SIFWEs are the direction on how we're looking at integrating these new technologies in experiments. And then on the exercise side, on the TIAD at least, what we've been able to do over the last couple of years is stand up a TIAD in the Pacific during a Pacific Century exercise a couple of years ago. In that TIAD, we brought some new technologies that we wanted to try and experiment with, and played with those technologies to kind of see where they would fit, how we could use them, how we'd want to change them. Then the year later, we went to the European Theater and Avenger Triad and did the same similar thing. And you definitely see how certain technologies are, there's obviously, like what Rhett said, requirements documents we try to write a little more broad so we can kind of plug and play what those technologies are. But both theaters are vastly different. So when we talk about integrating a technology, the idea is pretty broad, but in some cases, specific technologies don't necessarily work or fit right in one theater versus the other. And I think one of the things that Alex talked about with Maven Smart System, that's really where we're kind of looking at as that C2, how we're going to C2 the battle space and stuff. But when we talk about information overlays, how do we, what type of technologies can do that? We want to sense the environment. If we want to identify target audiences out there, those different type of technologies, we put them into different experiments through what was Army Futures Command, through the experimentation cycle they have there. They've kind of turned that a little bit this year into what's called the SIFWEs, and that's the experimentation cycle that they're using now as it transforms to the Transformation and Training Command. I think Alex has got something to add to that.
And then from a warfighting perspective, as you are bringing those capabilities, those technologies to bear, one, understand the true requirements as to what problems are those technologies trying to solve. And I'm happy to engage with whomever with a technical exchange meeting to say, hey, I need something that allows me to do edge compute and some type of AI ML on-prem in a small form factor, and here's what it looks like. That's how we can get together. But in that whole span, understanding that there is a pathways where you can actually fit in, and what are the priorities of work and what that organization is trying to achieve for that specific exercise, as opposed to flooding the zone with all of your contractors, all of your equipment, and having the expectation that you get 100% of everyone's time to validate your equipment. That requires you to do some legwork prior to, before we even deploy to whatever exercise it is. And again, we are happy to work with whomever that's bringing valuable capabilities that solve problems.
Yeah,
And
so
the last onto that from the proponency office side. So we've been running under Colonel Agnello, before I took over, from a information advantage campaign of learning, headquarters DAX ordinance being extended through, the fragment extended through FY28. And what does that allow us to do is give us the overall structure to take the lessons learned, identify those capabilities, the commercial shelf, to define that system of systems of what we need to provide to the warfighter, as well as it's informing the IS, ID, CNS, information systems, information defense, dominance, capability needs statement, to outline what are those broad requirements. So if you're trying to figure out where do you fit in your technology, we've got the document stepping through Futures Command of saying these are requirements for the information technology system of systems to support to provide the capabilities to the warfighter information advantage.
You know, all very good answers. What I would tell you in addition to that is the Army Unified Network is extremely important, and they're going to provide a core set of systems and services to all of us. Where we need assistance is those gaps that are not met by the Unified Network, or those things that range into the multi-partner environment. Those are the gaps that aren't filled by that Army Unified Network. And we've been lucky today because we have two subject matter experts in the room. One, you actually have Brigadier General Ferris, the 311 commander, and the actual authority to operate comes through him. So he's hearing these questions. And you have a former joint AO and Brigadier General Miles who's sitting right there. Don't let him blend into the crowd. So when we make recommendations to them to approve kit to get on the network, they're concerned with the risk it's gonna pose to their network, right? So if you have kit that actually works and does something for us that doesn't pose a risk to the network and doesn't break the network, they're willing to assume that risk. But we have to have assurance that it's gonna do those things. And so we will not make a recommendation to them unless we know that it's safe to go on the network and it actually provides a benefit to the network or to the users. So I think we have another question.
Good morning, gentlemen. Question on money. So coming at you, Rhett, but really, AJ, kind of for you as well. When you get into the new T2COM and Western Hemisphere, how is training readiness responsibilities in that particular color of money? Is that going to end up with, say, First Corps for 25 ID, 2 ID? Is that going to clean up, or those lines kind of get straighter? Or will that still be kind of a curved line? Well, and then, Rhett, careful how you answer this. Do you have laundered money that you have the ability to use?
So I'm gonna do the easy stuff and then pass it to Rhett for the hard stuff. So there is no such thing as a straight line in Indo-Pacific. Right? It's just not. The COCOM gets a certain amount of money that they get to use for certain things. They cover some of the cost of the things we need. The Army, for Nipper and Sipper, provides a lot of things for us. And then we have our G37 has an extremely large but focused training budget that they use to fund things for the exercise. So if there's network priorities that are a part of exercises, then those funds can go through our exercise budget and comes there. Those are all in inter-theater. At the Pentagon, I'll let Rhett talk to that, but one thing I would like to make sure everyone understands, right, when the administration took over, we came out with the new strategic guidance, and we're obviously on the cusp of getting a national defense strategy. But the focus of those areas was very simple. One, Homeland defense. USAPAC has a very large role in Homeland defense. Two, deterrence of China. We have an extremely large role in deterring China. And then three, burden sharing, which is working with partners. That is our bread and butter of what we do everything. So we are all through the National Defense Strategy. It's focused on our theater. And so when it comes to funding, the focus is not so much on how much we have, it's on how we use what we have to get after what the mission is. I'll turn to the rest.
I mean, at the Army level, you know, we're still trying to figure out what those lines look like. What is the TT peg going to look like? You know, I'm in the EE peg, right? The equipping peg is where I spend where all my portfolio is. But hopefully we're going to spend a lot less once this is all figured out, because this equipment is somewhat of intuitive, right? If it were up to me, I'd get rid of all of your government cell phones today. Right? Because it's a huge waste of money. I'm deflecting right now is what I'm doing. It's a huge waste of money, right? Because I can give you an app, MAM Intune, I can give you Azure Virtual Desktop for your MacBook, and you now you're now 24/7. You're attached to work, just like you want to be, because everyone thinks they're entitled to a cell phone, right? Okay. And then the first thing I get, you know, yeah, the problem, you know. There's always that one. It's like, what? Now soldiers are going to have to pay for their own cell phone, like they already do. Yes, they are. Okay, but that's how we're gonna modernize how this is going. I don't know what that's going to look like, where the training funds are going to shift. To be continued, maybe this time next year. But there's going to be a lot of changes with regards to how we train. It should be a lot more intuitive on the equipment, because the heavy burden of WIN-T and the non-intuitiveness, if that's a word, of how much time we have to put soldiers behind kit. Because I think the next gen C2 guys talked yesterday about it. the whole fielding and the training piece of fielding is 10 days for Next Gen C2. That's pretty impressive. So the schoolhouse is working diligently. Cyber Center of Excellence is working diligently on modernizing what that training looks like. Now, I have to get that kit to the schoolhouse so that they can make sure they're training on that kit instead of forgetting the schoolhouse and just get it out to the force. So,
And I'll put in a plug for the training centers, because Mel would hate me if I didn't. That's one of our issues too, is our training centers don't have the same equipment that we're fielding to the units, so it's hard for them to train people. But great question, Hip. All right. Colonel McCrone.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for your time. Lieutenant Colonel Brittany McCrone, 94th AAMDC Army Air and Missile Defense Command, Deputy G6. So out of Hawaii, familiar with the theater, and I understand there's efforts to pre-position equipment west of the international date line, but I'm curious, are we pre-positioning any like non-kinetic assets west of the IDL to help kind of set those conditions for when competition does turn to conflict?
Well, I'm not the one in theater. I'm here at Fort Gordon, so I can't answer that question specifically for the TIAD. I think that not specifically the international date line, but when we talk about non-kinetic assets, I'm not talking about. It doesn't have to be just EW assets. Non-kinetic assets, when we talk about non-kinetic, there's so much bigger than that. It's, we do talk about the civil affairs, the PSYOP, those type of organizations as well. Our capabilities with people that go out and engage, those things could be forward. I'm not gonna quote one way or the other if we're gonna send EW assets that far forward.
Yeah, I can't speak to specifics about locations of assets. What I can say is that part of the ATI, as you well know, as we look at combining MDTFs or transforming into multi-domain commands, one of the multi-domain commands is multi-domain command J, right? So that unit has capabilities. Where they reside and how they decide to use those will be that commander's decision once it stands up. Any more questions? Wow, we have killed it at 8:47. All right, so if there are no more questions, we'll start with Colonel Little with closing remarks, and we'll come down and then we'll close out and then release it.
First off, thank you for joining us at the 8 a.m. I know some of us came early because they wanted better parking or less traffic, or because they wanted to catch every single stoplight on their drive here, which was great with all the cars. The big thing to remember about the Tyranny of Distance with Indo-Pacific is that while, yes, you hear that, well, it's a Air Force and a Navy fight, and while that is partly true, everybody lives on the land. This is not Waterworld with Kevin Costner. We are all there, going to fight on the land, you're going to shoot from the land, you're going to resupply from the land, and that's where you're going to have to be rebuilding from, is from the land. And so in order to have that, you've got to remember that the superiority piece starts back home, because there is no more sanctuary, and that you're going to be under constant surveillance starting from forward. So how much can you see? What data do you need to make the mission work, but not so much such large pipes that you have to do all this reach back and that you're stuck. And that the guy and gal on the ground, the forces forward, have what they need to fight, to blind, deceive, and destroy the adversary's ability to sight, to understand the environment, as well as enable the commander's ability to see and understand what the adversary is doing at that time to gain decisive advantage regionally to support the overall joint force, as well as how do we have the interoperability, not just with the joint force, but with our allies and partners, because it truly is a joint, and a truly joint, in this case, not just the U.S. forces, but our allies and partners forces in that region.
Thank you, everybody, for your time. As far as closing remarks, the one thing that I want our partners here to take away is understand the requirements and how you can get after solving our problems, which would include linking up with us. Like, give me a call, give my senior technical advisor a call, so that way you can better understand what gaps and seams we have and what you can bring to bear to solve those gaps and seams, and the requirements to ensure that that technology that you're bringing does meet the intent and can actually get on the network and resolve whatever issues that we're trying to resolve. We are always happy to engage with you and to bring those systems to bear so long as they are able to meet the network requirements and be assured to come on that and is actually achieving a problem. What we don't want is to be integrated with you trying to help you solve things for us. Like, bring a ready-made solution that is ready to go, that is net assured, and can get after what we're trying to achieve, and we are happy to work with you.
So we're a data-centric Army. We all know that. And when we talk about data, data becomes information. And so when we talk about information, let it be over the network, let it be on the ground, what people are saying. That's all the information that has to be absorbed and has to be analyzed. So we need technologies that can analyze that data. We need technologies that can sense it. We need technologies that can ingest it, can analyze it, can present it, to visualize it. We need different technologies like that, specifically in this theater, because the theater is so vast and 52% of the world. I didn't know that. That was pretty interesting. And something like more than 50% of the population. You said something, yeah. So I mean, that's crazy. But like what JT said, the war is it may be a predominantly water-centric theater, but like JT said, people live on the land. You know, we win the battles on the land, and obviously us green suiters care about the land a little bit more than the other places out there. But you know, who's on the land? Humans. That dimension, the human dimension, is a huge place to hit. Now we need, and they provide tons of information. We have to be able to tap into that and be able to analyze what's being said, what's being presented. We have to have networks that can hold that data, store that data, analyze that data, aggregate it, and present it. That's kind of the large aspect that we'll look at. And that's what I would say. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so thank you. This archipelagic fight is not going to be easy. I can fit all of Western Europe and probably twice over in the South China Sea. That's Ukraine on this map wouldn't even be seen. It'd be small. It's just a fraction. Okay, just imagine for a second, right? Credit card and ATM machines stop working. Lights at intersections stop working here in the homeland. All right, planes get grounded because their navigation stops working here and in the Pacific. Political leaders, we just learned the political leaders and industrial leaders are being tracked by the enemy. That's the spectrum. That's the tyranny of distance. That's going to be the indicator for something that's going to happen. Okay, so however you can help us to figure this difficult fight out, we're going to have to fight what we have west of the IDL, west of the international date line. If it ain't over there already, that's why we do our project pathway or operation pathways, right? If it ain't over there already, it's going to take a while to get over there. We're going to go to war with what we have over there. Thank you.
Now, so in closing, first of all, thank you all for coming. I agree with him. 8 o'clock in the morning is very early on Wednesday after a whole bunch of socials last night. So for you to brave the free drinks and still show up at 8 o'clock really means a lot. Thank you to the panel members who did a great job this morning. And I will just end on one thing we didn't really cover a lot of, but when we talk about the tyranny of distance, what we didn't talk about is transport. And I would say, I would leave you with the importance of transport in that theater. As a signal officer, we grow up with a PACE plan, right? So when we talk about transport, we can say fiber, then we can say satellite. I'm missing a C and an E, right? So what we struggle to do every day is, how do we provide redundancy of transport to our bosses, right? Assuming someone drags an anchor across the bottom of the sea, and not that anyone's ever done that, but, and maybe a line gets cut. assuming there are kinetic and non-kinetic ways to affect satellites that fly over the South Pacific. Assuming those things happen, what's our tertiary method of transport? How do we move data at high speeds across that vast body of water? How do we reach out to the 8th Army commander in Korea or to the 1st Corps who's moved forward to the Philippines? Those are the things we struggle with every day. Those are the things we need help solving, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. If it was easy, there wouldn't be a panel to discuss it. It would already be wrapped into the Army Unified Network Plan or somewhere in an MPE document. And so how do we get to a point where our transport is as robust as we believe it is? Because we already know that there's an adversary who understands that we are network-centric. We're striving to be data-centric, but by either method, you have to have transport to get those digits, those ones and zeros across that body of water. And so how we do that in a efficient and effective way, how we move things through that soda straw, like Rhett said, how we ensure that when the adversary starts to take things down, there's another method for us to communicate. If we can't do that, then cyber can't ride across the network and attack people when it's not connected. Missiles can't fly if they don't have coordinates and GPS to get to their targets. Everything we do is based on connectivity. And if we don't have the transport to connect end to end from Washington State to Hawaii, to Guam, to Kwajalein, to Japan, to Philippines, to Thailand, to Korea, and possibly, well, we'll leave that out. But you all understand the point, right? We have to be connected. And however, whether the people in here that wear green suits that work in offices to deal with these type of problems, or the ones in here with suits and nice polo shirts that actually work in even better offices that are helping us solve those problems. Those are the things we need help getting after. And if you take nothing from this conversation is understand what is the PACE plan for the units in the Pacific. That's on NIPR, that's on SIPR, that's on SBUE, that's on MPE, any flavor of Centrix you try in. How do we talk to our joint and combined partners in the midst of a crisis? So thank you all for your time. Thank you all for coming. Y'all have a great day.